Charlie from the Rolling Stones died. What's going on with the band? I thought, Jesus, like, hey, you lost your friend. It's not easy to lose friends, though. I know that many friends leave you as you age, not just friends. It was certainly one of the saddest and most perplexing times in rock history. When Charlie Watts died in 2021, he was the beat of the Rolling Stones. Fans thought that his friends would be in the front row at his funeral. They were not to be found anywhere. There would be no Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, or Ronnie Wood. The real reason they aren't there is much more difficult than anyone thought. Don't be shocked when you find out this reason. The story starts in the middle of the 1980s, when Charlie Watts is going through a very rough time in his life. Watts had been known for most of his career as the quiet guy who played well with the band's wilder moments. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards make news for living rock and roll lives, but Watts is known for being moderate. But around 1983, that picture started to fall apart. He went from using drugs and drinking in a moderate way to doing much worse things. Watts would later say that he wasn't using drugs to get high like a rock star, but as a bad way to deal with growing family problems. He thought about it. They were my way of dealing with family problems. I believe it was a growth spurt. When I was around 1983, I changed into a whole different person. When I was around 1986, I came back to myself. What I did almost cost me my wife and everything. It was a shocking admission from a guy who was often called the Stones' moral compass. Surely his wife had been loyal to him since before the band became famous. Watts later said that her love for him was put to the test during those crazy years. At some point, he realized that he could lose more than just his wife if he didn't. To change himself, he was able to take back control of his life by the end of the decade. Watts made another big choice about his life in the late 1980s. He gave up smoking. When you think about how hard traveling and recording had been on him for decades, this was a big step towards better health. But even this dedication couldn't protect him from health problems in the future. Watts was told he had throat cancer in June 2004. Fans and the band both were shocked by the news. After months of treatment, the cancer finally went into remission after a very intense course of chemotherapy. Watts said, "That time I went to the hospital and 8 months later Mick told me, 'We're going to make a record, but we won't do it until you're ready.'" True to their word, the Stones took their time. They didn't push Watts to come back until he felt ready because Jagger, Richards, and Ronnie Wood were busy writing songs. He joined them in the studio when he was ready to work on what would become Bigger Bang in 2005. Surprisingly, he went on a hard 2-year world tour to sell the album right after he got better. Watts made a joke about it. "It seems like whenever we stop, I get sick, so maybe I should keep going." The next 15 years, Watts kept touring and recording with the Stones, even though he looked like he was getting old and sick. By 2021, though, his health was once again a worry. The band said that Watts would not be joining them on their No Filter US tour again on August 5th that year. He had just finished a medical procedure that many people thought was heart surgery. He and his doctors decided that he needed more time to fully heal before going back on the road. Watts had been with the Stones for almost 60 years before the choice. To keep the tour going, the band asked Steve Jordan, a longtime friend and partner, to fill in on drums for a short time. People thought Jordan was one of the few drummers who could fill Watts' shoes, even if only for a short time, because he had worked with Richards in the expensive Winos. Charles Watts died at the Royal Brompton Hospital in Chelsea, London, on August 24, 2021. He was 80 years old. Squamous cell carcinoma, a type of cancer, killed him. Watts spent his last hours with his family following the rules of private and honor that had guided his life. There were no public celebrations when the man who had been the heartbeat of the Rolling Stones for almost 60 years died. Only his family and friends were there. The news shocked everyone in the music business. Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, and even Bill Wyman, who used to play bass in the Rolling Stones, paid moving public honors. Jagger posted a happy picture of Watts laughing, and Richards shared a simple but moving picture of a drum kit with a closed sign on it. Wood talked about how close they were as brothers, and Wyman, who had left the Stones many years before, said that Watts was a beautiful guy. Beyond the Stones, there was a huge overflow. Rock stars and other musicians shared their sadness and respect. Many famous people praised Watts' work and personality, including Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr of the Beatles, Elton John, Brian Wilson, Pete Townshend, Nick Mason, Roger Daltrey, and members of U2, Bryan Adams, Liam Gallagher, Brian May, Roger Taylor, Kenny Jones, Chad Smith, Questlove, Peter Criss, and Max Weinberg. He was more than just a great drummer to them. He was a gentleman of rock, which is a rare mix of skill, humility, and charm. The Rolling Stones website turned into a digital shrine. Every page was changed for 10 days to a single black and white picture of Watts. He was there, with no words or directions. It was a powerful homage held in silence. Musicians Jason Isbell and Brittany Spencer dedicated a live version of Gimme Shelter to Watts 2 days after he died. This showed how influential he was beyond the Stones' own music. After that, on August 27th, the band's social media shared a touching video tribute. It was a medley of photos and old film clips set to the Stones' 1974 song If You Can't Rock Me, which starts with the words "The band's on stage. It's just one of those nights. Oh yeah, the drummer thinks he's really cool." It was a great pick. For longtime fans, it showed both his quiet energy and the knowing humor that was hidden behind his stage appearance. The funeral for Watts was a small, private event. He was buried in Devon, away from the eyes of the world, because he had always been against shows. But the parties of his life kept going. An official biography of Watts came out in October 2022, giving more information about the guy behind the drums. Rolling Stone magazine called Mick Jagger's social media post a moving ode to Watts on the first anniversary of his death. It included old pictures of Watts, Jagger's own voiceover, and the Stones' song Till the Next Goodbye. Watts would have been 82 years old on June 2, 2023. On that date, his estate made public Facebook and Instagram accounts. In a statement, his family said that he was too humble to use social media during his lifetime, but they hoped that fans would use them to honor his huge musical contributions to rock and roll, blues, and jazz, as well as the great person who was loved and known by millions of fans around the world. Watts left behind more than just songs after he died. It was reported in September 2023 that his personal library of books would be sold at auction. A signed first copy of The Great Gatsby was one of the treasures. It was expected to sell for between £200,000 and £300,000, which shows how well-read he was. Then, in January 2024, a new and different part of his impact began, when it was announced that the Bio Museum in France had bought a life-size copy of Watts's bio fabric from his estate for £16,000. It was a reminder that Watts, who was always a quiet collector, had bought more than just music. He had also bought art, history, and music. The Rolling Stones didn't go to Charlie Watts' funeral for the real reason everyone wants to know. At the time of his death, the Rolling Stones were already in Boston, playing their last few shows before their long-awaited No Filters U.S. tour. This wasn't just a quick go-through. There were stage crews, lighting planning teams, sound experts, and months of careful planning that went into it. Everything from the fireworks to the video displays had to happen at exactly the same time. If the tour had been canceled or even put on hold at that point, it would have caused delays and financial losses that would have hurt hundreds of people whose jobs depended on it. A big part of the band's duty was to their fans. The show had been pushed back once because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and people who had bought tickets had been waiting for more than a year. Not only would another delay have been bad for the Stones' image, it would have also been bad for their fans. The tickets of many of them had been kept since 2019. In August 2021, limits on international travel made things even more difficult. For flights from the US to the UK, there were strict quarantine rules. When someone came to Britain, they had to stay alone. And when they went back to the US, the same rules applied. Mick Jagger, Keith R. Richards and Ronnie Wood couldn't have flown to Devon for Watts' funeral because they would have had to stay in quarantine for weeks. If something went wrong, the show might not have happened at all. Also, health and safety were very important to them when they made their choice. At the time, the Delta variant of COVID-19 was spreading quickly, and any extra exposure, especially in crowded places like travel or meetings, could have put important crew or band members out of commission. There was a protective bubble around the Stones' traveling party that they worked hard to keep up. Even for something as important as a funeral, breaking that bubble could have thrown off the tour and put everyone's health at risk. Besides the practicalities, there was another thing that mattered. Charlie Watts was a person. He had always liked his solitude and didn't like being on display for no reason. Because of these beliefs, his funeral in Devon was small and quiet, with only close family and friends present. People who knew him best said it was the perfect way for him to say goodbye. Sam Cutler, who used to be Charlie's tour manager, said it plainly. Charlie would have hated a fuss. The Stones understood that feeling and knew that making his funeral a big deal would not have been in line with his personality. However, the band found important ways to remember him. Every night of the No Filter tour, they started with a moving dedication video of Charlie behind his drum kit. The screen was filled with old clips that showed how graceful and precise he was. They changed their famous tongue and lips logo to black and white, which was a quiet but strong sign of grief. Throughout the tour, performances were held in his honor, and Mick Jagger often spoke to the crowd about his friend. There were honors off stage as well. Keith Richards shared a picture of Charlie's Drew M set with a simple closed sign over it. The picture was stark and had no words, but it said a lot. Mick Jagger shared a picture of Watts Happy, which reminded fans of how much happiness he brought to the band. These actions were not over the top or dramatic. Instead, they were in line with Charlie's simple style and made sure that the goodbye touched millions of fans around the world. Let's go back to when Charlie Watts joined his band. A young Charlie Watts, who was already a well-known and respected jazz drummer in London, met a group of up-and-coming rhythm and blues players in the middle of 1962. They would soon change the course of rock history. Watts was a well-known figure in the city's club scene at the time, especially in places that catered to the growing interest in American blues in Britain. In this world, he met Brian Jones, Ian Stu Stewart, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards for the first time. All of them were regulars at London's rhythm and blues clubs. Even though they got along musically right away, Watts didn't join their new band right away. In London in the early 1960s, he was already making a steady income from his gigs, which is a treat for a